Hello. Um, Today's the 11:11 portal, and I'm being guided to record a message or a video on the function of our human sovereignty in the world that seems to be uh, polarized or functioning in even larger stretches of duality. When you approach it from a rudimentary three-dimensional standpoint. So uh, as the time portals change and then the times shift, uh, within our parameter of self, what we will notice the most, or we will experience the most, is shift of our psyche, um, possibly in and out of ideas of duality. So we will come into places where we feel whole and connected to the oneness of our being, or really the essence of our existence. And then we will very quickly, almost um, jarringly flip back into some form of polarity. Polarity that is pulling us some directions, causing maybe even like turmoil or stress or anxiety in our three-dimensional space. And so as our reality shifts and as our being comes into the form of awakening, you will notice the switch between the calmness and the peace and almost sense of awakening to, the jarring fallback, if that can even be used as a word, into the form of duality. And the duality almost carries its own set of rules and circumstances, and so the time's collapsing, the time is shifting, the time is kind of like coming together. But as a squish happens, if you can imagine a wider triangle closing its base, the time that it takes us to get from point A to point B, it just gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and hence that repetitive shift back and forth seems to amplify, right? And so how we would experience this, or how I experience it myself in my three-dimensional form, as very quickly, you almost think of yourself as bipolar, right? Like that is our human definition of flipping to one state from one state to the next, right? So you're hunky dory in one point of your life, and then the second something triggers or something changes or something catches your attention, you could very quickly be pushed back into the polar opposite of it, where you function in duality. And by duality I mean any we recently related to like a very specific time and frame here, but we recently went through an election, right? And so that charged energy of love and hate, of us versus them, of acknowledgement of another human being versus thinking that they're a devil incarnate, right? Is that charge in duality, right? And not only the flips between your solid sovereignty and then the functionality and duality are getting tighter, meaning like you're more likely to go from one to the next. What's also happening in the amplification of each one of those states is also taking place at the same time. So what you would think of meditational highs, or moments of peace and tranquility, you're starting to notice those amplify more and more and more. Meaning, once you're in the moment of peace, once you're in a moment of tranquility, it is the next level, right? It is almost like, wow, nirvana, a whole new state. And so the triangle is almost, if this is the side of your being that is a sovereign state of peace and not knowing and tranquility, right? It's almost like this part is stretching out. So the triangle itself is actually narrowing, but also growing taller, right? Um, so the highs are higher, right? I would say high as if I can even compare it, but I'm trying to use the most rudimentary human terms we have available, or at least the understanding that we can derive to. So the highs are higher, the meditative states are better, right? Your connection to the love once you're in that state is better. You can understand the oneness more so than ever before. You can spend time in peace and nature and really dive in into the essence of your being more so than you have ever been able to before. So that is us on the, let's say, the tranquil part of the triangle, right? And then of course the polar opposite thereof is duality, right? So now the lows are lower, the anger is angrier, the the loss of energy, is amplified. The loss of desire to participate, the loss of desire to engage, the loss of desire to experience oneness when you're on the opposite scale of this triangle is amplified as well. And so that is what we're going through right now. That is kind of the essence of our experience as this triangle merges itself, and then I will extrapolate it out. It will merge itself into oneness, right? So, the triangular nature, this geometric form of the two polar opposites, and the two polar opposites within this corner are merging themselves together, right? So, sooner or later, the goal, or where this is going, is within the complete merger, within the complete unification of self, you would be able to experience everything. I mean, everything within the oneness of every moment, right? And that is the essence of us, right? That is the true potential of our soul. That is us as a divine being, is experiencing everything at every moment outside of space and time, and outside of even perspective of self, right? You are solely existing in the beingness of this unity, and then you are able to experience it all from that standpoint, right? Probably I would say probably the most blissful state you can possibly imagine. More so than the highs of the high over here, and more so than the high and the lows over here. You're existing in the unification of your being, in complete love, right? Like the unification, that intersection of everything, is pure love, and that is where we're going. So. If you're feeling polarities, but at the same time, if you're feeling higher highs, know where they're coming from. Be able to recognize your sovereignty and not lose yourself in the highs, and not lose yourself in the dualistic polarity of the lows. Where the charge energy is more charged than ever, and where the higher frequency energy of connection to love is more high than ever. Not necessarily canceling those out, but functioning as its own separate states for now. Pre 2022, I would say even pre 2020, the split was a lot wider, right? So it would take us months, if not years, to go from the state of pure bliss to the slow transition into the polar opposite of duality, right? But in essence, we actually function kind of like at this threshold between the two, right? So we were never high, and we were never truly low. We were just kind of right here in the middle, kind of the bottom of that triangle. Making sure that my hands are actually in the frame. Bottom of that triangle, functioning in kind of like the solid state of the scales of balance, right? If you think of scales of justice, we were kind of balancing between the two, right? But as our destiny is taking us to the unification of ourselves, and unification of us into the oneness, part of that is the closing in of that triangle, right? Which obviously, if you can imagine, pushing any kind of scale and compressing the energies thereof creates turmoil, right? It creates highs and creates lows. It creates polarities and dualities that in the past would have taken us month to uncover, a month to understand, and now we're simply being compressed into having to figure them out, understand, compress, and understand ourselves within each one of those moments, right? So I would say, besides that being the whole larger picture, that is the other aspect of it. Please understand that that is what you're experiencing, right? As opposed to being lost in the moment, aware like, oh my gosh, this can't get, this possibly can't get any worse, right? Or, oh my gosh, those people can't get any worse. So, oh my gosh, how much idiocy can my one being experience, right? So you can blame yourself, you can blame others, or you can possibly get lost in the highs of the high, right? Where you'll go, oh, this area of me and this sense of self and this balance is complete perfection, and I don't want to function in the duality, right? You would almost be appalled by the functionality of yeses and nos and this versus them. But again, realize that the balance actually exists, and recognizing this section of yourself and then recognizing this section of yourself, and looking at it from the observer standpoint of view, where you're allowing yourself to experience the duality, and you allow yourself to experience the oneness, but not being lost in any one perspective thereof. I think that makes sense. It's as I'm speaking this out loud, it's making sense to my three-dimensional space. So, but I have personally struggled with this, like literally like yesterday or today, is why such a high highs and why such a low lows, and why so fast, why such a big, almost like a ping pong game of like back and forth, right? And you feel like you're losing your mind, right? You feel like you're almost losing the sovereignty of your faculties, to where you can't seem to contain yourself at any one point. But all of that is basically canceled out, or at least recognized, once you realize what is happening, right? Once you realize that the compression of the energy equates to, well, energy. When energy compresses, things happen, right? Hence the bombs, right? When the bomb goes off, guess what? It's just a compression of energy, and then the outflow has to happen. So, not to compare our life, to a time bomb, but it almost seems that way at times. So one, to recognize you're not a walking time bomb. That is just your way, your personal sovereign being ways of experiencing something that is being brought upon from your higher self, right? From your higher standpoint, from our point of divinity, is that we are unifying our being, right? Pause, center in, and identify where am I functioning? What point of self am I at right now? And if I am experiencing some sort of anger or some sort of anxiety or some sort of depression, you realize, oh, I'm in this side of the triangle, right? I'm inside this bubble, and so the lows seem lower, right? But at the same time, realize if you're experiencing endless bliss, realize, oh, I must be on the side of this triangle, and the highs are just super high, right? Which is great, right? It feels great. But at the same time, realize that jump back to the duality of the three-dimensional standpoint, will happen soon, very quick. But realize that you don't have to be bouncing back and forth like a ping pong ball. You can just center in and go, oh yeah, here's the tendency. Here will be my tendency in this moment to jump into this duality and dive into whatever three-dimensional story is being told, right now in this moment. Or have the tendency to sit in meditative state for 5 hours and shut off the world and experience the highs of the high, right? There's got to be balance. The yin and yang comes in there, our energy field comes in there. All of that is kind of the essence of that. So I hope it was helpful. It was sure helpful to me as my three-dimensional being is still continuing to process this. But I think it gives a great explanation of what has been happening for the last 2 weeks, maybe even 3 to 4 weeks. If I had to put a time frame on it, I would say it's that. But I'm being told it's kind of a last 2-year progress, and so we're just starting to feel it more and more as we merged to unity, right? But I'm sure I'll do another video on how the unity maybe looks like, and what is the progression of once this triangle collapses in, and we're kind of being forced into complete unification. But hopefully we'll have enough time to be able to experience ourselves narrowing to where we have enough time to catch up. I'm being told we will. We have enough time to catch up and align ourselves, before total collapse. But in essence, that is our path in life: is unification of ourselves, recognition of our divinity, and then I say divinity, but at the same time, it's kind of like the essence of ourselves. It's just love. We're love. It's just how long will it take us to recognize it? But we are being guided by our higher beings to get there quicker. But we came here with that goal, so nothing is out of ordinary. It's just maybe our three-dimensional space is having a hard time understanding the essence of what we're going through. So, hope it was helpful. Thank you for listening, and happy merging.